And now I'm very excited to bring back a wonderful sports bear, longtime friend of the show, and Mr. Ron A. Sports from the Inside Blitz. You can follow Ron on Twitter at Ron A. Sports. Ron, here we are, my man. There is just all kinds of sports coming in directions, man. We got NBA, we got college football, we got NFL and hockey and all that stuff. College basketball starting. How are you doing, man? How is things treating you lately?
Well, it's getting to the time of year where we know a whole bunch about the teams, but after 11 weeks of college and 10 weeks of the NFL, it's fun, but it's also a grind. So we just have to keep doing what we're doing, keep the methodology going, keep the routine going. And it's been going good as far as the results. The results have been really good. But every week, though, the years keep going by, you saying, oh, my goodness, the season's getting longer and longer. Please don't make it 20 games or 18 games.
The seasons are pretty long, especially now that college football has been extended another week or so, at least now because of the playoffs. But also a lot more to talk about, obviously. And, it's funny. It brings me up to my first question here. It's interesting. I look at these rankings, and I do say, I think it is wrong. I mean, I as much as I love my Indiana ticket to make the playoffs, and they don't belong ahead of some of these SEC teams. They don't. Notre Dame. I mean, I will say Notre Dame did schedule FSU. That Florida State. It's not their fault. Florida State stinks. It's not their fault. USC is not a top program right now. They still have to play USC, but they also lost to Northern Illinois. It's just weird to see Georgia so low, even though, they're better than a lot of these guys. It's and that's why I wonder what SEC team do you think is out of these ones are not going to make the playoffs? Now, first of all, I have to eliminate A&M and Missouri, and maybe you can say something later. You think A&M is going to beat Texas at the end. That's a different story, but I think Texas is in, but it's Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. I don't think all five get in. So I'm going to say, I would say Tennessee's the one that's probably going to be out with 2 losses maybe. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, every year is different. You never know which conference is really that good or that bad until you look at their out-of-conference stuff. I thought the SEC, for example, last year wasn't as good as people indicated, and that got proven a little bit later on. Pac-12, what was left of it, last year was a really exciting conference. This year, the SEC is really good, and because Notre Dame is still in the mix, they may only get 4 teams in. So you're right. 3 of them are going to be out. That means A&M will most likely have to upset Texas to get in, or somehow with a series of other losses that they find themselves in some 5 or 6 or 8 team tie and get into the playoff game and get that automatic berth. They're going to have to do more. Missouri's schedule just isn't strong enough. So they're probably going to have to do more. Alabama's 1 loss away from being out, and they had a couple of close calls. You never know about the Auburn game because that's a fierce matchup. We've seen Auburn, who's a Jekyll and Hyde team. They could come up and do something.
Yeah.
I will say this. I hope Ole Miss makes the playoffs because I think Ole Miss is one of the 5 best teams in college football. They were at a terrible scheduling disadvantage when they played and lost in overtime to LSU middle of the year. They lost that tough defensive struggle also by 3 points to Kentucky. But this is a really, really good Ole Miss team, especially along the defensive line, which we've never been really able to say that before. So if they're out, they're taking one of the best teams in college football out of the playoff mix. So I personally have Ole Miss ahead of Alabama right now. I would have Ole Miss ahead of Georgia actually right now. Texas is the cream right now, even though Georgia beat them. So it's just crazy. Tennessee's going to need another signature win. We're probably going to see 4 unless Notre Dame loses to USC at the end of the year.
Yeah, Tennessee's loss to Arkansas hasn't aged well for them, although they're still ranked ahead of a lot of people just because of the 1 loss. But you assume they're going to lose, and we'll get into that game, coming up here. I just don't see, Alabama would be the only 1 ranked win they have, and then you'll see Indiana without a ranked win. Getting in just with one loss to Ohio State, which is interesting. Now they are blowing out teams, so that's always good on the efficiency ratings, and that's why they're at least pretty high in most of our power rankings. They're just not a higher than some of these SEC teams for me. I think I have Indiana 12 or something like that.
Yeah. And the ratings don't matter. I mean, we've seen in all kinds of manipulations at the end, whatever it is, the TCU Baylor year when both of them didn't get in and Ohio State snuck in, whatever money was involved in that. Alabama, maybe there was inside information that Nick Saban, it was going to be his final year. He lobbied long and hard to get that fourth spot last year. So these rankings are nice for conversation pieces, but especially since the leagues have gotten longer, 18 teams in a league, 16 teams in a league, they're going to play each other. That's going to most likely sort itself out.
All right. Well, I hope so, because there's going to be some complaining. Even though it's not 4 teams, it's just going to be some complaining because it's so deep this year. All right. Well, let's talk about some buy low, sell high teams then. Do you have any teams that you could buy low on right now that you think the market is a little bit underrated on?
Well, it's probably hard to do it this late in the season. Probably middle of the season, I could have come up with a little more buy low, sell high type of teams. There's some that I may be talking about when we get into the games itself, but I'd add one more. I think Texas State has been disappointing this year. They lost a couple of 3-point games. They've had only one blowout loss. Their record stands at about 5-4. This is much lower than I thought it would be at this time of the year. But I think they could still put it together, make a late push. Too little, too late. They can't win their side of the Sun Belt Conference, which is the only conference still that has divisions. But I think Texas State is better than shown, and maybe they should get a little love.
No, I don't disagree with that. With Texas State might be a buy low team. That makes a little bit of sense to me. That they really underachieved. I thought they were going to have a shot at making the playoffs, even being that one school from the smaller, but they just lost some of those close games. Yeah, for me, I think Kansas might be a buy low team. I was on them last week though, and that helped. It worked out well, but I mean, there's still a 3-point dog against BYU. Now it is a night game in Provo, and maybe we should talk about that game a little bit later. But I thought, at Kansas or Michigan State, I think Michigan State being a 3-point dog at Illinois, I'm not so sure that Michigan State's not going to improve here coming up. They have a great coach there as well at Michigan State, and Smith, and quite well about Jonathan Smith, and I think that they're going to get better and better. Obviously, is what I'm thinking. So I would probably say Michigan State. Sell high. There's a few of them I could sell high on, Ron. Why don't you go first on that?
Well, the one I was selling about a few weeks ago was Oklahoma State, and I sold high on Air Force right away. When you run 55 for 166 against Merrimack, I think it was week 1, that was a really telling story. The sell right now, I'm gonna defer to one of the teams that I'll talk about later. I don't really have another sell team that comes to mind right now, other than one of the teams I'll talk about later.
Okay, no, we'll get into your sell high later. I should have said South Carolina even last week was probably a really good buy low spot on South Carolina. Now they're kind of a big spread here against Missouri, but I wouldn't doubt if they covered that game. BYU's probably sell high, and I guess that just kind of tells you
that's
probably
good.
like Kansas. I think they just kind of keep skating by. There was a penalty that helped them win that Utah game last week, and they have good fundamentals and everything, but they're not that real talented team that you can expect. I think, they've been kind of getting by with smoke and mirrors a little bit. So, and I said that about Iowa State a few weeks back, and that's turned out well, fading on Iowa State. So, it's always good to do this exercise, especially in the middle of the season, when we're talking about this stuff. But you're right, it's so late in the game. The market should have caught up on some of this stuff. I do have less bets this week so far than I have the other week. So maybe that's, part of it, but let's get into a little college football week 12 then. Before we get into some of the games that we picked, the 6-pack that we picked, Anything for Friday? I'm looking at UCLA versus Washington, and I was at this time of year, I was thinking, God, Washington's probably going to be a buy-on team for me as Jed Fish kind of goes. But then again, UCLA is just kind of playing with belief. They're Deshaun Foster's got them working over there. The way they beat Iowa, the way they beat Nebraska on the road. Started out with them beating Rutgers on the road, but it's almost like they just keep getting better and better. I mean, I wanted to bet this spot with Washington, but the market's kind of saying the same thing. They're at 3.5. I really can't do much with 3.5 because Washington still isn't, where they're supposed to be yet. So it's one of those, I almost lean to the other side on that one. Anything for this game or any Friday night thoughts?
I think in that game, you hit it right on the head. UCLA's stat sheet has really improved drastically in the last 3-4 weeks. They're running the ball a little bit better. They're stopping the run. They looked like they were lost the first 3-4 weeks, that the season was going to be a disaster. Instead, it's Washington that's making some mistakes. They're 5-5. If they lose this game, with Oregon having double revenge and wanting to stay on top, Washington could miss a bowl if they lose this game. So it's an absolute critical game for Washington, who's obviously its season win total is long gone now, which was fantastic. They only returned a handful of people. Like a lot of teams lost so many people in the portal. They lost their coaches and stuff like that. This is too tough of one to handicap because of UCLA's improvement. I think you'll see Washington's best effort, but I don't feel comfortable in this game right now.
Yeah, it's like if I look at through just a metric from a full season, you have a decent favorite for Washington. And then just the last 3 games, UCLA flips completely to UCLA is a big favorite. It's kind of weird looking at these numbers. Yeah, it's all over the place right now. Probably a stay away from me too. It's the shame that we cannot bet on Friday, but it's how it is sometimes. There's nothing out there. I mean, you got Wyoming at Colorado State. Does Wyoming have anything left in the tank? I don't know. Colorado State kind of might be in the Mountain West Championship. That'd be great for Boise State, if that happens.
Yeah.
Geez, Arizona is just a dumpster fire. I would lean Houston going to Arizona, to be honest with you, but then could be that T-Mac type game in Fafita, and they just look good that game. It's just one of those too. It's just a lot of variance with these games. North Texas was everyone's darling last week, and they failed. And UTSA, coming off the bye might be improved a little bit. So nothing for me on Friday either, unfortunately. I wish there was. East Carolina Tulsa's Thursday in East Carolina. They already had the coaching bump of getting fired. So it's like now they're like 14.5 against a bad team. It's a pretty ugly game. Let's talk about.
They look different, yeah.
For sure. Let's talk about some of the games we picked in. Let's talk about something that I bet early. South Florida versus Charlotte. And Charlotte's +3, total 53. I actually took 3.5, but I like the 3 still. This is just a good betting game, I think, this week. Neither team right now is bowl eligible yet, but the 49ers are kind of fighting for their lives. They have to win all 3 of their last 3 games. The reason USF, South Florida's favored, is their defense. And in looking at their defense, I think they're inflated a little bit. They rank 41st in defensive success rate, but their strength of schedule is only 79th on staggering compared to Charlotte, who's 55th. South Florida ranks 78th in defensive EPA, while Charlotte ranks 91st. So it's not that far off from the EPA perspective, but on offense, both teams are just not that great. 118th for USF in success rate, 120th for Charlotte. So they're almost equal in success rate. Yards per play, almost equal, both of them close to -0.8. And then I'm thinking, why is the home team the dog here? And the thing about Charlotte, they had a rough 3 games. It was against Navy, Memphis, and Tulane. And that game against Navy was a little misleading. It was a bunch of coughing the ball up, bad situational football for them. A little bit misleading of final score, but I like the fact that Charlotte's coming off the bye. It gives them time to fix some of those turnovers. It gives them a little bit of belief that they can make a bowl game here. And it's not like they're playing a good team. And I always say be careful betting that team with that trying to get to bowl eligible. They're there for a reason. But same thing, it's South Florida. And South Florida still might be on their backup quarterback. We don't know if what's his name, Drones is back. I like Charlotte still. At home dog at +3 at two very close to equal teams. I did for 2.5 stars, Ron.
Yeah, Charlotte, I expected there to be more, based on my power ratings, I expected Charlotte to be getting more points, even off rest. But so I can't play the game because it's too low in terms of where my numbers are. But USF has been disappointing, and they couldn't build off last year. I know there were some injuries, quarterback and so on, but I expected them to at least be close to where they were last year. Charlotte, I still have a concern about the second year coaching staff. I don't think it's a bad spot for Charlotte. I just can't play it because my numbers support them being 6 to 7 point dogs. Not so I feel like I'm getting cheated in the line.
Yeah, very possible. And my numbers are closer to pick 'em, so we're all a little bit off on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's it. This is a good play for me. I like teams coming off the bye. And what's funny, Josh just chimed in. We love Josh. He was on last week. Sell high this week. Louisiana laying like 8.5 against South Alabama. Seems that high here, and I agree with that. And I think that South Alabama's coming off a bye. And another situation coming off a bye at Louisiana. Yeah, man. South Alabama's for sure could be a great spot here to bet. So thank you for that one. I'll be looking at that one a little bit later. Let's go to the next game. And Syracuse versus Cal. Cal's like -8.5. Total's 55.5. Ron, you picked this one. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, kind of a sell, one of those buy low, sell high. Syracuse has been doing it with smoke and mirrors. If you really look at their rush data, for example, it resembles a team that you would think would be 3-6, not 7-2. They've also allowed 2 out of every 3 passes, excuse me, to be completed. Their place kicker barely can kick a field goal over 30, 35 yards. There's a lot of things going wrong. The one thing going right is that the coaching staff has buy-in from the players, and winning is contagious. And they did a lot of that, and they were winning a lot of close games. That ended last week when they lost against Boston College 37-31. And, you say, okay, the line looks high. I mean, Cal, they're not bowl eligible. They've had some bad luck, or they've self-inflicted wounds. They didn't run the clock correctly against Miami when they were up 22, even though there was a missed call with all the linemen downfield in the Miami game at the end. Cal should never have put itself in that situation. They led by 22. They had a hangover the next week, lost by 2 against Pittsburgh. They had a 1-point loss against North Carolina State. Yeah, they missed a field goal. And I was just going to say that special teams have been the death of them. However, they have made a lot of their recent kicks, I think. They made their last 9 place kicks after being 7 for 14. So they made some corrections there. Basically, this is a team that I think is underrated. Wilcox gets them playing well defensively. Syracuse makes the long trip. If you look just straight at the stats, and if you look at my power ratings, I think Cal is definitely the better team. A little bit of worry playing it over a touchdown because Cal doesn't have a lot of history this year right now, winning by that kind of margin. But there's so many factors in terms of the stat sheet and everything else that favor Cal. Maybe Ott, the running back, gets going. He's been hurt. He didn't have a good game last week, even though Cal did fine. If they get that run game going, then they can take care of business in this one. Maybe McCord keeps it close if he limits his own turnovers. But I think Cal is the better team. And if the stat sheet catches up to Syracuse, it's going to be a double-digit win.
Well, there you go. So you're laying the 8.5?
Yeah, I haven't played the game yet because I wanted to see where the line movement was. And if I lose the line movement, we'll see what happens. But I thought there'd be maybe a little bit of people saying, wow, Cal's that big a favor. They have this record and Syracuse has this record, that maybe we get a public correction. So I have not played the game.
That could happen. And I have the number Cal minus 9.25 on my power ratings. I have Cal's at 1.07 net yard per play advantage. Their success rate wise, Syracuse is good at success rate, but when it comes to PPA or EPA, they're only 72nd. It's just one of those teams that kind of choke in the red zone, and a
Yeah.
lot of times. And that's Kyle McCord, and he's kind of always done that back at Ohio State. That's why Ohio State people, and their defense is terrible. My Boston College was my biggest bet last week, and I don't know how Boston College went back in the game, but then they pulled ahead later. But it was like nice to see Boston College win in that spot. So it's like interesting. I'd be fading Syracuse again. I'm gonna wait this out too. Maybe this crawls to 7 or something. Not a bad idea to wait this out. My numbers say you do agree with you because I'm in the past the 9. Cal hasn't been. You're right. That team that always covers by a lot or beats teams by a lot, but their tempo is actually a little bit higher than it has in the past, and Syracuse's tempo is kind of up there too. So that could happen. There's room for that. So we'll both lean Cal right now at the 8.5 and watch this line. Baylor versus West Virginia. This is another one that I played. Now it's plus 2.5. The total's 59. So this was interesting to me. Baylor is the team, and if you lost some bets on them, I think I lost 1 or 2 in the beginning of the season. I'm sorry. They should have never lost that bet to Colorado. Yeah, I'm sure we were probably both on the wrong side of them. But the truth is we were right to bet them. They're a solid team. And they were, I actually had a big 65-1 future for the Big 12, but they just crapped that away with the Colorado loss. They could have been in the mix right now, but they're a much better team than people think. And they're coming off the bye. They're gelling right now. And West Virginia is kind of coming off a misleading final score from last week when they beat Cincinnati. Cincinnati was the reason that Cincinnati beat themselves with the turnovers and everything. But, West Virginia, they have a quarterback issue right now. We don't know who's going to play in quarterback. Their starter hasn't played there in a while in Green. Baylor, number 50th in offensive EPA, 61st for West Virginia. But West Virginia's defense is 107th in EPA, 75th in success rate, while Baylor's defense is 24th in success rate, 6th against the run in defensive success rate. So, a positive 1 net yard per play, while West Virginia is minus 1.2. I know it's road chalk at minus 2.5. I took the money line. That's what I like it at minus 135. I don't love laying road chalk, but under 3, I'd rather just take the money line here. And so I'm going to play Baylor here off the bye week. Again, same theme here. Coming off the bye, I think Baylor gets done.
Yeah, I think the money line is a smart move in this particular case. I'm having a very good year in the Big 12, so I looked up my Baylor numbers. I'm 0-1-1 in Baylor games. So
Right.
I actually lost the Baylor BYU game. I thought Baylor could handle BYU. I think it was a revenge spot too, but that was when I didn't think BYU was going to peak like they did. It was kind of early in the season, game 4 or 5, and BYU was just rolled along. So I missed that game. This is another game you picked that I thought I was going to be on Baylor, but my power rating said they should be a dog. And so I'm not going to lay against a West Virginia team that tends to play close games. That's why I think you made a wise move to at least do the money line part of it, because West Virginia, last week, no exception. Actually, both teams have played a lot of close games. I am surprised that West Virginia is a dog in this particular game. My power ratings do not support that. West Virginia has the edge in the kicking game. Baylor has disappointed me in terms of they haven't finished games to my satisfaction. They lost a couple of leads. Dave Aranda just was puzzled by some of his fourth quarter play in a couple of their losses. So if Baylor becomes a dog, I'll take a really serious look at them, but otherwise I'm going to have to pass.
Yeah, and it's because of Garrett Green, with that upper body injury, and we don't know. I doubt I don't think he's going to play, and they're just not as good without him. So I think that's the reason you're seeing it. I make injury adjustments on my power ratings, and that's why it flipped. So that's, you can have a perfectly efficient rating, but just like in the NFL, if you lose a quarterback or something, you have to account for that. So I think it's important. Let's move on to the next game then. Washington State versus New Mexico. New Mexico's plus 12.5. The total's 72. Pretty big total, Ron. Maybe that's why you picked this game. We'll find out.
You're reading my mind. That's why I picked this game. Let's talk about Washington State a little bit. They're 8-1, and they're ranked in the college football playoffs and all that stuff. And they're the West Coast team you want to root for because they got left behind in terms of the realignment. But if you look at their defense, it's not good. If you look at their defense, I expected, because I put yards per carry projections on every single team to start the year, and I'm pretty good at it. But when I'm wrong, sometimes it really shows. And then when I'm wrong, that helps me make adjustments mid-season. So they've allowed 5.5 yards per carry, corrected for sacks and kneel downs, because I use a formula in terms of my rush data. So that's historically bad for an 8-1 team to be allowing 5.5 yards per carry. Also, their 64% pass defense is not what I would have expected against the level of competition that they played. Is it a misnomer then that they've only allowed 20 points per game in the last 4? I think so. The numbers are really good offensively, and obviously they're going against the New Mexico team. It's really nice to play against the New Mexico defense. You can't fix everything all at once when you bring in a new coach. Bronco Mendenhall is a great coach, but he inherited a train wreck over at New Mexico, and you could see the numbers defensively when they were allowing 6.5 yards per carry, 6 yards per carry, whatever it is. Even right now, I'm trying to look at my number. It's in the 5s now, but it's not a good defense. We know it's not a good defense. 5.5 per carry, 64% pass defense. 8 times out of 10, they've allowed 35 or more points. But New Mexico's offense and their quarterback, Dampier, what is it? He's a high percentage passer. The overall rush attack is 6.8 yards per carry. Their running back right now is averaging close to 8-9 yards per carry his last 3 or 4 games, and over 7 yards per carry for the season. I put an over note on Washington State for their last 3 games of the year. Got lucky last week with the Utah State one when they had that barrage of late fourth quarter scores to go over the 69. It went from, I think, 56 to 63 to 70 to 77 like nothing in the last 2-3 minutes. And so I have another overlook here, pending the weather always check the weather before you do some of these things. It's a large total, but how many punts do you think there'll be in this game?
0. Probably fumbles. You'll get maybe some turnovers. What the good thing about Washington State, what they've been riding on is +9 in the turnover ratio. New Mexico is +8. So that certainly can put up points. Josh says at Step on a Duck could see sleepy Wazoo performance here. And I wonder about that, Josh, because they do have Oregon State on deck. So are they sleepy here, or are they just looking at their playoff ranking thinking like, oh, we only have 1 loss to Boise State, we should be in the playoffs. Hey, let's try to win out and then start yelling. This schedule is not going to get you in the playoffs with 1 loss. But unless complete chaos happens, but if they should be thinking that, at least on offense. Maybe they're a little sleepy on defense. So Ron looking at a big over here. I mean, that's what I say in college basketball too a lot. I'm like, this is totals high for a reason. It can definitely go over, and it does, So sometimes there's value even in the high numbers, It's not like you take an automatic under. So, my numbers on this, and usually I have to look at the road. So I have it, Washington State. My number is 81 points, Ron.
Okay.
And this is just this is my algorithm spitting it out, and usually I make a little bit of an adjustment, and it usually goes down, but it's not going to go down to 72. So I'm with you there. I'll lean to the over and maybe take it later. So I like what you're saying there. New Mexico should put up some points too, especially at home. So let's look at that.
And I think what Josh says, and Josh knows his stuff. I was on one show with him before. I've heard him on Kyle's Spaces and so on. I think we shared the stage one time as well. Happy to get to know him and shout out to him. I do have my power ratings favor New Mexico in this game based at the current line. I don't know if I'll actually play the game, but I think there's a little value on New Mexico.
All right, a little bit of value on New Mexico Lobos. Not me. I have it as a 15-point spread, but it is what it is. ASU versus Kansas State. Kansas State minus 9.5. The total is 50. Ron, I stared at this one for a while. This was yesterday, but I was kind of looking at it. And maybe you have something. I've got a couple angles on maybe both sides, but why don't you tell me what you're doing with this one?
Yeah. So I put these games on not necessarily because I'm going to play them, because they're good brainstorming talking points. To me, for Arizona State, they've had an amazing turnaround considering how they flipped their roster in the first 2 years of the new coach's era. They've really flipped this around to the fact that they've got a really good future. And they're running the ball with Cam Scatabo, if that's how you say it. He's having a fantastic year. They're running over 5 yards per carry. He missed last week's game, and against UCF, not the greatest defense in the world, although they fired their defensive coordinator and got better. They ran 32 carries, 99 yards. So he's a very important part of their offense. He's expected back this week, but it's early this week. We're doing this on a Tuesday, so we don't know for sure whether he's back. I'm here to tell you, if ASU is one-dimensional in this game, that's not going to be a good scenario for the team, even though Arizona State's defense has exceeded expectations. My situations with Kansas State are they're a good home favorite. They're a good home favorite under Bill Snyder. They were good at everything. And then under this coach, they've also been pretty good in terms of a home favorite, 13 of their last 17, I believe. When they're picked via the running data, they have been 55 and 30 their last 85 versus my rushing stat formula. 14 and 11 under this coach, which is only 56%. It was higher, but they're 2 and 3 this year. So they've slipped a little bit. They're usually good off rest. They have a kicking edge. They have a place kicking edge. They have a sack ratio that's outstanding. They're good off a straight off loss. There's a lot of Kansas State great issues. If Scatabo plays, my power numbers are probably not going to permit me to really play this game. But I do believe that you could play up to 10 if he doesn't play. I do believe that if Arizona State becomes more one-dimensional, that it just tilts too much in favor of Kansas State. So that's the side I'm going to be looking at.
Can't believe these two teams haven't played each other ever, or at least since as long as some of these stats go back, a very long time. Because you look at covers, they have nothing for head-to-head. It's just been that long. Yeah, it's at home. I do look at Kansas State straight up is 4-0 at home. I mean, that's big. It's Kansas State's a great home team, and the problem is they're coming off the bye. And ASU's just been kicking butt for a long time, but I am worried about Scatabo if he plays this week. I stayed off ASU last week because he was not playing. I regret it because I had a strong lean to them, and I would have loved to have cashed that ticket against UCF. I mean, and I was frustrated. I was like, man, why did I talk myself off that? Because it was Scatabo, and so I don't want to like make the okay, I'm going to bet him this week type thing. It's just almost too much going on here with how important this game is to Kansas State too. And this is a good team that you're looking at, not a bad team trying to make a bowl. This is a good team trying to make their conference championship game in Kansas State, So, I mean, from a numbers perspective, I have Kansas State minus 7.75 point favorite. So I'm close to the number. I'm probably going to stay off it, but it's going to be a great game to watch and learn a little bit more about ASU too for bowl season,
And I'll probably end up off it as well if Scatabo plays because the number, like you, I'm lower than the odds. But so I'm going to need him not to play, and then I will be on Kansas State, and I will be willing to lay a little bit more.
And you have to make that play later too, obviously, probably 15, 20 minutes before the game, because that's when they're going to really tell you, unless you get some great inside information, which is out there sometimes. So think about that. Let's talk about the big one, Tennessee versus Georgia. And Man, it's funny. I feel like I'm on repeat this week. Well, Ole
Mhm.
Miss was one of my best bets last week. I bet Sunday at 3.5. I was like, I knew it was off on Sunday. Thing closed at like 1.5 or one, and obviously spread didn't even come into fruition because Ole Miss beat them by a lot. I almost feel like I'm doing the same thing except with more numbers now. Now Ole Miss is better than Tennessee, but I'm looking at the same stats, and I feel like it's just the same handicap. Sometimes you just got to put a blindfold on the names of these teams. If you put a blindfold on what the name Georgia is and Tennessee, and you just look at these two teams and how they play, you'd be like, how is this a 10-point spread? In my opinion, now Georgia's got two things, just like they did last week. What I said, I made the handicap. They got the coach and Kirby Smart that's going to have the coaching advantage. They blew away Ole Miss the year before, so could have said that. And they have a strength schedule advantage. They have the hardest strength schedule in football. But everything else goes to Tennessee. Not quite as much as it was with Ole Miss, but all the numbers really go to the Vols. They have a 0.8 net yard per play advantage over the Bulldogs. They rank 22nd in offensive success rate, 46th in offensive EPA. The Dogs are 33rd in offensive success rate and 44th in offensive EPA. So the EPA are close, but Vols got a better success rate. But on defense, Vols are number 2 in success rate, number 4 in EPA, And you can say strength of schedule, but they played some tough teams. They beat Alabama at home. The Bulldogs ranked 14th and 20th respectively, so it's not that their defense is terrible. But I mean, I'm looking at two teams that numbers-wise, things favor Tennessee. Even the offensive and defensive scrimmage yards and line yards, they favor Tennessee. So it's the same handicap, not quite to the same extent it was with Ole Miss. But I'm not talking about a 2.5-point spread here. I'm talking about a 9.5, 10-point spread here. I know it's so desperate for Georgia, but this is desperate for Tennessee. I think something's wrong with Georgia. They don't have the same playmakers that they have on wide receiver. I think their quarterback's very distracted lately. I had to take the number. I took the 9.5, 10. If this goes to 10.5, I have a bad number, I guess. But I did it for 2 stars. So what about you on this one?
Yeah, my indicators also point a little bit toward Tennessee, not drastically in their favor, but enough in their favor that would be my lean. I know the Tennessee quarterback went out of the last game. I guess we're going to make the assumption that he could have come back in if needed, or he's going to be fine for this game. I don't know the status of him. I would double check that. Tennessee's defense, especially against the run, is better than it has been in a long, long time. It looks like even their pass D is markedly improved. So I like what they're doing defensively. I don't see anything wrong with Georgia's stats sheet. If I really look closely, it's not that far off from the last couple of years. They're allowing more points, but their individual stats aren't too bad. And Carson Beck isn't, to me, he's performing. He's not the end of the world that the sky is falling. He's just not Heisman quality performance. He's doing okay. He's going to face a tough defense here. The kicking game, Georgia's kicker is elite. So that's really helpful. I would try to get as many points as I could with Tennessee. That would be my lean. Again, with the SEC especially, because I've tracked my performance for over 30 years, conference by conference. And other than last year when I did very well with the SEC, I am literally a 50% handicapper in the SEC. So when I look at that and I self-judge myself, what I try to do is I need extra indicators to get me over the top to play an SEC game, because I just haven't been as proficient with the SEC. Now, this doesn't count the bowls. The bowls I've been fine on, but I'm just talking about SEC versus SEC. I kind of run 50%, and I'm aware of that, so I need more indicators.
I know, fair enough. More indicators. I guess you put a blindfold on me, too, because the power ratings still have Georgia -6 or so, but it's not -10. My power ratings really give me an edge, too. I mean, it's one of those I'd be more mad at myself for not betting in it and it wins and then betting it and it loses type situation.
Always ask yourself that question. Yeah. If how do you feel if you bet it? If you feel like, oh, I shouldn't have bet it, then maybe you should take a closer look and not bet it. But if you feel like I've got to have this play when you really have that conversation with yourself. It's a good conversation to have.
Oh, 100%. It absolutely is. Let's do a little hodgepodge, man. I mean, let's look at Rutgers, Maryland. Maryland's lane 6, total 51. You know, Rutgers is kind of in a letdown spot. Rutgers was my most likely dog to win outright last week at +6, +200. And they won because, you know, Kalik Manis played for Minnesota. It was just one of those spots that I just see Rutgers coming off the bye. But now I see weakness in Rutgers, too, coming to Maryland. And Maryland's laying a pretty fat 6, though. I think that's a little high for a Maryland team right now and the way Maryland's playing. They did okay against Oregon. It's almost like Oregon was sleepwalking yesterday. Yeah. I don't know. This one I probably would bet Rutgers if I had to bet it, Ron.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of betting bottom 5 coaches, and the Maryland coach has made multiple appearances in my bottom 5 rankings. But everything points to Maryland. I'm taking a hard look at Maryland. The line is a tad high, but within my range. I think this is a good spot. They've generally played well against Rutgers in the past. I'm looking at Maryland in the spot, but I'm not thrilled betting a coach like this as a favorite. But it's a spot they should deliver. They have better athletes. Rutgers is not as good defensively as we've come to see in the past. They're not as hard-nosed against the run as they have in the past. They've really got burned in that area. UCLA exposed them, and UCLA wasn't doing anything offensively until they met Rutgers. So I think Maryland has matchup edges. They just don't have the coaching edge. That's the one area.
They don't have the coaching edge for sure. That's it. Wisconsin at Rutgers, was Oregon at Wisconsin. I should say that Wisconsin, you know, I'm a Badger fan, but they've been just so all over the place this year. They just, you know, I could not believe how bad Iowa beat them. And then Iowa goes and loses to UCLA. That's college football for you, you know, but, you know, and then they're one of their, I wouldn't say coach, but one of their advisors gets a DUI, you know, this week. He hits a sign, and he ends up in the front yard of somebody. It's so funny because Jack Del Rio, you know, he's kind of a big name. You know, he's from California, and everyone's saying, "Oh, you can't drink like the Wisconsinites," is what people are saying. But I know it doesn't really completely reflect on a program, but he still was there at Wisconsin being an advisor, you know. And I don't know what kind of like really that they got from him, you know. It was more probably just doing him a favor, putting him, you know, in some sort of a position to make him look important. But, you know, he screwed up and went partying and decided to drive, which is stupid, especially at his age, you know. But at the same time, we're talking Wisconsin, Oregon. It's 14.5, and I hate to say it, but my number's 18. But it's also a great spot for Wisconsin as they're coming up. This could be their one rallying spot, and Oregon could sleepwalk through this. You know, I've seen Wisconsin upset teams in this situation. They just also play out of their minds a little bit. You know, they brutalized some teams this year, and then they choked and just got thrown around the trenches some weeks. I've definitely shied off on Luke Fickell a little bit, especially Phil Longo. I don't think he knows what he's doing, but you know, that's a long-term perspective. I can't bet it because my power ratings is 18, but if I had to, it'd be Wisconsin. What about you?
We can have a little fun here. Yeah, Jack Del Rio's gone, and they missed their chance to hire Dana Holgerson to take over the drinking duties for the team because Dana's a big-time drinker. But he just got elevated at Nebraska. My power ratings are 15.5. You know, this is almost like a trap game for Oregon. The situation really does favor Wisconsin. It's exactly what you said, but my metrics favor Oregon. So there's kind of a give and take in both of that. It's a clear pass game for me. I think Wisconsin's still trying to be something that it hasn't been in the past, trying to change the way they do business as a football team. Like Nebraska of old, they're not the same smash mouth team right now where they born and bred offensive linemen and they go after you. And unless Luke Fickell changes that and gets back to the Wisconsin brand of football, it's going to be trial and error from an outsider's perspective, at least from my perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if Wisconsin hung close with Oregon. I think there's some there's Oregon's not a really, really complete team, but on the other hand, I don't know what Wisconsin does to stop the threat of Oregon, the balance that Oregon has offensively.
Yeah. I know that's definitely it can get ugly whenever you play Oregon. But Oregon's good on defense too. They're not bad on defense. It's like
Right.
it's and that's the thing. It's like you saw Penn State throw us around a little bit. I thought I had a great number on Wisconsin plus 11.5 the week before. It went all the way to 6.5. I gave it out 8.5, and none of it hit. None of it. It's just one of those. It's just the kid Braden Locke chokes a little bit when he plays the bigger teams, and I've seen it. And as big as the spot this is, maybe this is that Pac-12 team that comes in and just shits the bed too. It's funny. This would almost be like a money line play rather than a spread play, because if Wisconsin's really in it, then that would be a possible thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Missouri, South Carolina. South Carolina's minus 12.5. I lean South Carolina here. My number's 12, but I'll still lean South Carolina. Missouri with that awful quarterback. By the way, I had the under last week in Missouri versus Oklahoma.
Oh no.
34 points in the fourth. It was 9-3 in the late in the third quarter. 9-3, and 34 points were scored in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Between these two teams, imagine that beat. But I'll tell you this: Drew Pine, he is awful, absolutely awful. I expect that Brady Cook's still out, right?
I don't know. There was an interview that was Las Vegas Chris sent to me, and Brady Cook sounded like he was going to make every effort to play in this game, and he would make a really big difference if he did. Very good conversation that he held in this game. My issue with Missouri is I think the spread is high, especially if Cook plays. I think the spread is high.
The spread's too high if Cook plays, but at the same time, you still could see possibly. It's just you don't need to play this until right before the game.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to wait. But there's two conflicting factors. Number one, this is a large spread for South Carolina to be laying. As good as they are, I haven't seen this kind of spread between relatively comparable teams in a long time. South Carolina favored. But then if you look at, they've actually played 4 of the same teams, which is rare now within these 16-team conferences. Sometimes you don't play anybody, but they have 4 common opponents, and in every case, South Carolina gets the edge. So South Carolina has earned the right to be a larger favorite based on the fact that the same opponents that each of one of these teams have played, South Carolina has played much better against them. And that's the fact that's keeping me off Missouri right now.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, well, good stuff, man. Let's move on to our next topic, which is beer bet bangers. Any plus money, and this is kind of like how Kyle does the most likely dog to win. All right, but it doesn't have to be this. It could be any sport. It could be the Heisman. I do find it interesting that Cam Ward has dropped down to plus 700, but I really think a lot of people want Travis Hunter to win this thing. It's like I have a little bit on Dylan Gabriel at 15-20 to 1. He's only 3 to 1 now, but I have a tough uphill battle here with Travis Hunter, and Cam Ward can throw up some serious yards against Wake Forest. And if they do win the ACC championship, it's still stay with that one loss and get past the first round of the playoffs. It could be Hibbs. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to go that route. Do you have any plus money that you looked at?
Well, before I get to that, my question is, the Heisman voting typically closes before the playoffs happen. So the first thing is they have to get to the playoffs. If Miami doesn't get to the playoffs, Cam Ward is probably, even if it's the defense's fault, probably not going to win the Heisman.
So even though that the first game's the 21st, that's a great question, actually, because before the playoffs were the 31st, so I was wondering if the Heisman voting does end before the 21st this year.
Yeah. I don't know if they changed the rules this year or not, because I'm typically not involved in Heisman voting, but it's something that is worth looking into. I will say that, because if you can squeeze in a playoff game, that's different. than if you
that
don't
absolutely.
squeeze in. So that's an important piece. I'm going to stick to a game, and I'm going to give you a real long shot. I mean, a real long shot. And maybe they lose by 30, or maybe they sneak
I
in a
love
win.
big long shots, Ron.
Okay, double-digit long shot. I just kind of looking at the thing. Louisiana Tech has lost 3 games in overtime this year. So it's kind of skewed their record. They're 3-6 overall, but they're 3-3 in games not decided by overtime. And I don't have their schedule in front of me, but they probably lost 1 or 2 games against teams in the Power Four, which is above their pay grade. So are they that much different than Western Kentucky? According to my power ratings, Western Kentucky deserves to be double-digit favorites. But who's to say that Louisiana Tech, if they didn't squeeze out a couple more wins, would have a different power rating? We'd have a different view on them. I'm just curious as to whether or not they just say, hey, forget these close games. We're either going to lose 40-10 or we're going to shock Western Kentucky in this game.
Maybe, man. Wow, that's an interesting one. Louisiana Tech is big, plus 370 right now on DraftKings. Yeah, I like it. I like that shot. That's a legit shot right there. Gosh, part of me wants to say Wisconsin because I think I'm not going to be a homer, but I'm also going to go with a pretty big one. I'm going to go with San Jose State against Boise State. I'm going to go with San Jose State plus
gutsy.
390. It is gutsy, but I'll tell you, the San Jose State's kind of been a feisty team. If you remember that Washington State game, that came down to the last 2 points. They put up 50-some points.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they upgraded their coach this year, because obviously look what happened to Arizona when their coach went out there. And was it Rip? What's his name? Brett. I lost it on the top of my head.
Brett
Brennan. Yes. He is terrible. And San Jose State. People were on them last week against Oregon State, and they won pretty comfortably in the second half. That's when they won it, really. I know they had that strange loss at Fresno State, but man, I think they're kind of live here. I think that could happen. Boise State could let down a little bit. You remember Boise State's they're letting points being scored against them. Nevada put up 21. That was only 28-21. UNLV was 24-29. You remember early in the season, even Georgia Southern put up 45 on them. It just could be that one bad spot for them, So why not? It's close to yours. Since you took a big one, I'm going to take a big one.
Well, San Jose State did a smart thing in the offseason. They played very well last year, and they kept their defensive coordinator for this year. And they put up some pretty decent defensive numbers, even with all this transition period, with all those new coaches in the Mountain West and a couple of new teams that they're playing in Washington State and Oregon State, and now going against the heavyweight Boise State. And sometimes the pressure gets on these teams like Boise State, knowing that one loss could hurt them in terms of getting into that new expanded playoff format. And we see these highly ranked teams not cover versus the spread. You're going to have to rely on the quarterback having a pretty clean game, but it's possible.
I was looking at Arkansas versus Texas. I was like, could that happen? Nah, I doubt it. I think Texas is going to make it happen, but Arkansas is another one that could score points sometimes. So, I mean, they're just so inept in defense, but that's all you need is Texas just to kind of blow that, What was that? What was the other one I said take the money line on? I was also looking at Florida LSU, but Florida's down there like third quarterback now, third or fourth quarterback. That was just
they may match up. It may not be bad.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think Josh asked about Kansas, and this is something, Kiev, you've already talked about as a team that's flying under the radar for you. In reality, BYU is not the best team in the Big 12, even though they're undefeated. If you look at their power numbers, I do think, I don't know what happened to Kansas State in that game against BYU. That was a real perplexing final score. But Credit to BYU for doing what they needed to do, even though I think they were outplayed last week against Utah. At one point, they're going to lose, and then they may just kind of lose momentum. If they lose once, they may lose 2 or 3 times. And Kansas has been snake bitten. They just have to get a little bit better. They have to recruit or get the portal a little bit stronger defensively, because I think Kansas has lost 2 or 3 late leads this year. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this predicament where they may not make a bowl game.
They lost more than that. The whole losing their offensive coordinator this year, Penn State.
That hurt a little, yeah.
That hurt, but they're getting it back, because I always liked Lance Leopold, and this is Lance Leopold after the bye. They beat Iowa State. I will say that Kansas defense, I watched that game because Kansas was a play for me. Iowa State kept coming back, and this was in Kansas. It was actually at Arrowhead, the game,
right?
And that's where they're playing this year. But at BYU, here's my only problem with this game. It's a night game in frickin' Provo. Night games in Provo are just bad shit happens tonight. Night games in Provo, man. And it might just be Kansas fumbling the ball away. I don't. By BYU's +10 in turnover margin, they don't turn it over much. They probably know that they skated by last week. BYU did outgain Utah by a lot of yards last week. That made my column of my most misleading final scores. BYU outgained Utah 339 to 259. So even if that terrible penalty officiating at the end didn't factor in, it still would have been a misleading final score. They won the turnover battle 3-0 too last week. It's like, come on, man. Mm-hmm. So it worries me. I'm going to wait on it and see if I get a 3.5, Josh. But if you believe that that Lance Leopold is a great coach and he fixed them from the bye, this could be a bad spot for BYU. They have lost 9 games in Provo. Don't get me wrong. They have. It's not an impossible thing. So. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of thought on which way you want to go. I definitely I like that. Well, great stuff, Ron. Go ahead.
The Holy War can take a lot out of the. I mean, that's such an important game to both schools. You wonder if there's going to be even a little bit of a letdown, even though they have bigger fish to fry now.
Absolutely, that can take a hell of a lot out of anyone. So great point on that one. How about, before we go, anything in the NFL this week tip your fancy? I found the lines to be a lot better this week than last week. I had a good week last week, but anything tip you in the NFL?
I'm behind on the NFL. I was gone traveling yesterday, so I didn't do as much as I want to. I will say this: my first impression on the Buffalo-Kansas City game is that Buffalo will take care of business in this game against Kansas City. I'll do a deeper dive. It's such an important game for Buffalo, even though they've won each of the last 3 years. Buffalo has gone to Kansas City and won during the regular season. All that doesn't matter to them because they keep losing to them in crazy ways in the playoffs. So they really, really want this game. If you talked about taking the jersey off, the name of the jersey off a team. If you take the name of the Kansas City jersey off the Kansas City Chiefs, they don't look like a 9-0 team. They look like a 6-3 team. So if Josh Allen does what he's been doing, I do think they're focused to do something in this particular game.
Yeah. I've been staring at this one, and it's actually going towards Buffalo. It's 2.5, maybe 2s in some books. I'm guessing you're gonna get some Chiefs money. I don't think you have to worry about a 3 here. It'd be gobbled up pretty quick, And you're right, but the Chiefs get it done through perfect coaching, great fundamentals, and a wonderful officiating. So
that's what I've heard.
It's always at the end of the game, and Lane Clark is the official in this game. He's more of a road guy, so I'm a little worried. But it is Buffalo's home run. Frickin', I got to make the playoffs. I want to win my division. I want to prove you wrong spot. It's funny. I last week I said Chiefs were going to lose against Denver, half jokingly. I bet Denver, but I also teased the Chiefs, and I needed the Chiefs to block that field goal. Hit my teaser too. So I was just one of those. But the gods shine down nicely on that one for me. But no, I mean, Buffalo, I have them as a favorite by power rates by 2.5 points. And that's given them a pretty decent home field advantage of like maybe almost 2 points. I think I give them, I do have Buffalo a better team power rated than Kansas City. How can you not? Because Kansas City is not covering big
So do I.
spreads,
I agree with you. I have them a point better on neutral ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Just that Mahomes thing scares you. I would say I would play the money line and not the 2.5, or not even the 2. I would rather play the money line if you can find a cheap one. I would just say just wait on it throughout the week. So I kind of like Cleveland at the Saints this week. Cleveland's actually way healthier. Nobody's talking about them so much right now. And Jameis Winston is very yin and yang. But when he has a bad game, then you bet on him the next week. When he has a good game, you bet against it. That's been working great for me in his career. But he also played for the Saints for years. This is kind of like his little revenge spot. And this is the healthiest the Cleveland Browns have been all year. Even that's including the beginning of the year when they were really injured. The Saints, man, I won the plus 3.5 last week. I bet the coach fire spot and a few other things. But to be honest with you, with all those field goals that Koo missed or whatever, that was the truth is that they got massively outgained. And so, yeah, I'll take Cleveland. I'll take Cleveland and pick them here. I got plus 100. I kind of like Cleveland here. I'm going to talk more about it on the NFL pod later. But that's what I'm looking at this week.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. Jameis Winston, the Saints secondary isn't scary, especially Marcus Lattimore not there anymore. So he could win it, he can lose it. He's very volatile, but spot looks like quite a possibility too.
100%. Well, Ron, you've been the best, man. I really appreciate you coming on, breaking down these games. Where can our listeners get your wonderful information?
Every once in a while, I can be heard on the radio with you guys, Kyle, and so on the Spaces on Friday. I'll have an article, NFL article, some quick bullet points coming out in the next day or two on the NFL. Las Vegas, Chris and I, we talk every Tuesday. We brainstorm. We made a live bet today. So we do a lot of fun things with that. And then the Inside Blitz with my good friend Ted Sobel back on Thursday. NFL, college football, right in my wheelhouse. So we're having a lot of fun with it. Long season, but like we started this show, it's still fun to watch these games and see how it all unfolds. We don't know the final result of these 12-team playoffs, and the uncertainty is a fun thing.
It certainly is, man, and it's been great having you on those Friday shows too. But man, you are one of the people I look up to. You're the best. Thanks again for coming on, Ron. We'll be chatting soon.
Thank you.